Greetings, Guardians. This is Olympus Alliance. Cleaver. One of the most iconic tanks in Hero Wars, Alliance. One of the heroes almost every Guardian recognizes immediately. And yet, when we talk about the true endgame meta, Cleaver has struggled for a long time to secure a permanent place among the very best tanks in the game. But now, things are changing. Cleaver has just received a major rework. Several important parts of his kit have been upgraded, his damage profile is changing dramatically, and perhaps most importantly, this isn't even the end of his transformation. Because later this season, Cleaver is also scheduled to receive his relics. So today, we're not here to tell you that Cleaver is suddenly the best tank in Hero Wars. We haven't reached that conclusion. What we want to understand is something much more interesting. Has this rework created the foundation Cleaver needed? And when the relics arrive on top of it, could Cleaver finally become a serious endgame hero? Let's look at exactly what changed. And we have to begin with one of the most recognizable abilities in the entire game. Rusty Hook. Before the rework, Cleaver threw his hook at a distant opponent, dealt physical damage, and pulled that enemy directly toward himself. Simple, useful, and incredibly recognizable. But the reworked Rusty Hook takes that concept much further. Cleaver now throws his hook specifically at the farthest enemy. He pulls that hero directly toward himself. And instead of physical damage, Rusty Hook now deals pure damage. That distinction is extremely important. Pure damage doesn't interact with defenses in the same way physical damage does, so Cleaver is no longer relying on penetrating armor for this part of his pressure. But that's not even the biggest change. Because Cleaver's basic attacks now deal pure damage as well. And this is where we immediately started paying attention. We're not talking about simply increasing one number on an old ability. Cleaver's fundamental damage profile is changing. Every basic attack now represents consistent pure damage pressure. And think about what Rusty Hook is actually doing at the same time. Cleaver isn't simply damaging the enemy backline. He's taking the farthest enemy and saying, "Come here." Suddenly, a hero that was positioned safely at the back of the enemy formation can find themselves standing directly beside Cleaver. And that becomes even more interesting when we look at the rest of his reworked kit. Because next comes Putrefaction. The original version of Putrefaction already had an interesting identity. Cleaver dealt pure damage to nearby enemies and himself for 5 seconds. The rework maintains that identity, but extends the duration. Putrefaction now deals pure damage to Cleaver and nearby enemies every half second for 7 seconds. And immediately, you can see the connection. Rusty Hook pulls the farthest enemy into Cleaver's territory. Putrefaction punishes enemies that are standing close to him. That backline hero isn't safely watching the battle anymore. Cleaver has dragged them into the worst possible place, right beside him. And Putrefaction keeps applying pure damage around that area for 7 seconds. There's another detail here that shouldn't be ignored. Putrefaction's damage depends on Cleaver's health. That's interesting for a tank, because you're already naturally interested in increasing his survivability. Health isn't simply helping Cleaver remain alive. It's also directly connected to the damage of Putrefaction. So the tankier Cleaver becomes, the more potential this ability has to contribute offensively. Then we reach his third skill. Mutilation. Previously, Cleaver struck the area in front of himself, dealing physical damage and stunning his opponents. With the rework, The control remains. Cleaver strikes nearby enemies in front of him and stuns them for 2 seconds. But once again, the damage has been converted into pure damage. And now look at the complete sequence we're beginning to create. Cleaver identifies the farthest enemy. Rusty Hook pulls that hero toward him. That hero is now inside Cleaver's immediate area. Putrefaction can pressure nearby targets with repeated pure damage. Mutilation can hit nearby enemies with more pure damage. And stun them for 2 seconds. Meanwhile, Cleaver's basic attacks are also dealing pure damage. This is why we don't want to look at each change individually. It's the complete interaction that matters. The hook creates the positioning. The positioning creates opportunities for his nearby attacks. Putrefaction creates sustained pressure. Mutilation adds control. And his basic attacks continue applying pure damage between those abilities. That's a much more interesting Cleaver. And finally, we have Heavyweight. This one is simple, but definitely not irrelevant. Before the rework, Heavyweight provided Cleaver with 3,220 additional strength at maximum level. After the upgrade, that becomes 4,800 strength. That's a significant increase. And remember what strength means for a tank like Cleaver. More strength means more health, more survivability. And because Putrefaction scales from his health, there is another natural connection inside his own kit. More strength helps Cleaver survive. More health supports Putrefaction. And the longer Cleaver remains alive, the longer he can continue applying his pure damage pressure and disrupting the enemy formation. So when we put everything together, this doesn't feel like 4 random upgrades. There's a direction here. Cleaver is becoming a tank that doesn't simply stand in front and absorb punishment. He wants to disrupt positioning. He wants to kidnap a vulnerable hero from the backline. He wants enemies standing close to him. He wants to punish those enemies with repeated pure damage. And he wants enough strength and health to survive while doing it. That sounds much more threatening than the Cleaver we've been accustomed to. But now comes the big question. Is this enough to make Cleaver meta? Guardians? We're not going to answer that yet. Because there's another chapter still missing. Cleaver's relics. Those are coming later this season. And that's why this rework becomes even more interesting. We're looking at Cleaver today knowing that this isn't necessarily his final form. We've seen the reworked skills. We can understand the direction. We can already see some very interesting interactions. But then we're going to add an entirely new progression system on top of this hero. And depending on what those relics provide, that could be the final piece Cleaver needs. Or maybe it won't be. That's exactly what we need to discover. Because becoming a strong hero is one thing. Becoming an endgame meta hero is something completely different. At the highest level, Cleaver isn't competing against average tanks. He's competing for a position against some of the strongest defensive and utility options in the entire game. So we're not lowering the standard just because we like the rework. The standard remains the same. Can Cleaver consistently improve top-level teams? Can he survive against the strongest current damage dealers? Can Rusty Hook create meaningful advantages against today's backlines? Can all this new pure damage actually make a difference against endgame compositions? And when the relics arrive, do they complete the package? Those are the questions that matter. But one thing we can already say. This is a much more interesting Cleaver. The rework gives him a clearer offensive identity. Pure damage is appearing throughout his kit. His control remains relevant. His ability to destroy enemy positioning remains unique. His strength has received a substantial increase. And now, we're waiting for the relics. So maybe, after all these years, we're finally approaching the moment where Cleaver doesn't just become the legendary hero everyone remembers unlocking, but a hero Guardians genuinely want to place inside their strongest endgame teams. The rework has opened the door. The relics could push him through it. And when they arrive, we'll find out whether the Butcher of Dominion is finally ready to return to the meta. Until then, Guardians, don't write Cleaver off. Not yet. Because his transformation isn't finished. Stay sharp, and we'll see you on the battlefield. Salute and friendship.